Yo, what's up guys? Teacherpaul over here and welcome to travel videos. Well, travel with me. Today we are traveling to Brazil. We're going to learn a little bit more about Brazil, history, culture. And I was looking at Geography Now's channel and he has a video, Geography Now Brazil, but it's 5 years old. Come on, we need an update. We need a newer version. Come on, Barbie. If you're watching this, do a Brazil version. A new one, because we want to see it. If you guys are not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you're watching from Brazil, beleza Brasil? Roda a vinheta.
Se você quer aprender a falar inglês, é aqui que você vai ter sua vez.
Okay, so without further ado, let's learn a little bit about Brazil.
Hey Geography peeps, so Brazil is one of the largest countries in the world. Obviously, I won't be able to cover everything within about 10 minutes. I'll try to do my best, but in the meantime, soccer, monkeys, Amazon, Ronaldo, and samba songs, capoeira, anacondas, carnaval, and attractive people that kind of have like tan skin. Oh, come on guys, you knew that was coming.
Wait, that was the wrong Ronaldo. That is a Ronaldo from Portugal. And I don't know the song.
Soccer, monkeys, Amazon, Ronaldo, and samba songs, capoeira, anacondas, carnaval, and attractive people that kind of have like tan skin. Oh, come on guys, you knew that was coming.
It's time to learn geography now!
Although I do understand the joke, these are the stereotypes of Brazil. Whenever you talk about Brazil, you think everyone is like tan, you think everyone is, I don't know, a model, or everyone sambas or plays football, yeah, Brazilian stereotypes. Or if you don't think any of that, you think we kill each other because, City of God and all.
Hey everybody, I'm your host,
If you've ever watched the movie, you know what I'm talking about.
Barbie. I guess that's a thing now. And after weeks of anticipation, we finally finished the Brazil video. And you know how we start these things. Let's dissect the flag. The flag of Brazil has a green field with a yellow rhombus in the middle and a blue disc in the center with 27 stars scattered throughout the disc and the country's motto depicted on a white band sprawled across the blue disc. Some people might tell you that the green represents forests and yellow represents gold, but yeah, that's not really true. The green and yellow are actually inspired from the former imperial flag of Brazil, which was derived from two royal households, the green representing the House of Braganza for King Dom Pedro I, and the yellow for the House of Habsburg that his wife Maria Leopoldina came from. The blue disc and
As I said before, Brazil used to have kings and, the House of Braganza, I think there are still descendants and they are still princes and princesses in Brazil, but they don't hold any position in the government, but they still exist and they might be your neighbor. You might run into them. So, yeah.
the first, and the yellow for the House of Habsburg that his wife Maria Leopoldina came from. The blue disc and the stars are what make up the most fun part of this flag. Each star represents one of the 27 states of Brazil. Furthermore, they are all separated into 9 different constellations that you can typically see in the southern hemisphere. Straddling across the blue disc is a banner with the country's motto, Ordem e Progresso, which means order and progress.
Ordem e progresso.
A flag with stars representing each state in the country. Ah, Brazil. I think there's some people that can gel well with that.
Okay, and there's another fun fact that Brazil was actually, it used to be called the United States of Brazil. Fun fact.
Now here's where things get a little fun, because each section of Brazil kind of has its own little story. But first, Brazil is the largest country in the South American continent. If you grew up in Latin America, you would have been told that both South and North America are together one continent, but for pragmatic definitional reasons, we're just going to treat South America as a separate entity, as its own continent. Brazil's domain stretches all the way from the Atlantic coast and deep into the interior of the continent. Brazil is bordered by every single South American country except for Ecuador and Chile. You could also technically say that Brazil borders France. Why? Because of this little guy. Uruguay, French
Okay.
Guiana. That's right, this is not a country, but rather an overseas territory of France. It's okay, raise your hand if you just learned that. You're learning. The country's capital is the aptly named Brasilia, located slightly inland in the central west region of Brazil, and actually administers itself in its own federal district, much like Washington, D.C. Brasilia was actually built in 1960 as they were switching from the old capital, Rio de Janeiro. That's right, it's pronounced Rio de Janeiro, not Rio de Janeiro. Get it right, we're not in Mexico, this is Portuguese, not Spanish. This was
Wait a second. Don't rush into things. In the north, they can say Rio de Janeiro. They can say de. But you know, in the south we say G, but you can say de Janeiro, and you can say G Janeiro, Rio de Janeiro, Rio de Janeiro. You know, it depends where you're from, like north, south, east, west. It depends. We have different accents in Brazil, so you can say Rio de Janeiro, but you know, there are some people that say Diego, and some say Diego. You know, so it depends where you're from. So don't jump into conclusions that fast.
was done in an attempt to provide a more regional neutrality for the rest of the states in Brazil.
Let me just rewind for a second there.
Portuguese, not Spanish. This was done in an attempt to provide a more regional neutrality for the rest of the states in Brazil by centralizing the capital. Brazil is divided into 27 federative units, 26 of which are states, and one federal district, which is where the capital resides. Each state and region of Brazil has their own unique flavor that they bring to the table, and we'll discuss more about that in the demographics, but essentially it kind of goes like this. We grow food. We got all the money. We are so black. We are so white. Stop cutting our trees. In terms of disputes, Brazil has 2 disputed areas with Bolivia on the Mamore River and 2 disputed areas with Uruguay on the Uruguay River and in the Masoyero Rivera that nobody cares about. Funny back.
Let me just go back. I'm going to comment a lot on this because I also know a little bit of Brazilian history. So when he said the South were all whites, it's because there was a huge concentration of Europeans in the South. Whereas in the North, Bahia, which is, you know, northeast of Brazil, it was where the port, you know, where the Africans were brought to Brazil by Portugal, you know, because of slavery. So the port was Bahia. So it had a huge concentration of Africans that came from Portugal. Well, because of Portugal, Portugal brought the Africans to Brazil, and they were in Bahia. And the Europeans stayed more in the south. Italians, all over, like every single European. The Polish were there as well. There's a lot of different colonies in the south of Brazil.
Stop cutting our trees. In terms of disputes, Brazil has 2 disputed areas with Bolivia on the Mamore River and 2 disputed areas with Uruguay on the Uruguay River and in the Masoyero Rivera that nobody cares about. Funny backstory, Uruguay actually used to be part of Brazil, known as the Cisplatina province, yada yada yada. There was a war, they gained their independence. Brazil has a ton of islands off their coast, but the furthest reaches of the Brazilian domain would have to be the 4 island and archipelago chains in the Atlantic: Fernando de Noronha, the Rocas Atoll, the St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks, which is a non-permanent residence science lab station, and Trindade and Martin Vaz. Otherwise, the western...
Okay, just when, like, if you want to learn Portuguese, right? When you see the N and the H together, that's a nha sound, it's nasal. Noronha, Noronha. So, Fernando de Noronha. Okay, so when you see NH together, it's a nha sound.
de Noronha, the Rocas Atoll, the St. Peter and St. Paul Rocks, which is a non-permanent residence science lab station, and Trindade and Martin Vaz. Otherwise, the western mainland borders look kind of funny. If you look at the map, it kind of looks like Brazil has river Tourette syndrome, in which they have a lot of half rivers, but then they jump onto the next adjacent river, which is like a couple hundred kilometers away. It's like, I'll take part of the Rio Acre, but then, I'll cut through and make my way over to the Rio Puros. I'll take the Rio Santa Rosa, but then, I'll jump over to Rio Breu. This all had to do with centuries of disputes with the former empires, and today you have this massive piece of sovereign complexity. And that's just the borders. Wait till you see what's inside the borders. When you think of Brazil, everybody just kind of automatically defaults to one image, the Amazon. And yes, the Amazon is a very imperative factor to the nation's domain. However, there's a lot more to it in terms of landscape and terrain. First of all, about 60% of the entire Amazon rainforest is located in Brazil, mostly in the north region, and of course, no surprise, consists of the most heavily compact ecoregion on Earth. Out of all the 10 million species of animals and insects known to human beings, about half of them call the Amazon rainforest home. Many of the species that have yet to be discovered are still lingering about in the deep, uncharted depths of the Amazon today. Now, we all know that there's a huge deforestation problem going on in Brazil in the Amazon to provide more agricultural land. However, even Brazil's own citizens are harshly criticizing the action. It's a little tricky though, because with Brazil's rapidly growing population, more resources are demanded of the people. So it's kind of like, we get it, it's bad, but I mean, what do you want us to do? Our country is growing and we need to provide you people with more stuff. Use alternative methods! Like what? We're working on it! Otherwise, outside of the Amazon, the rest of the country has a vast array of contrasting scenery almost equally as fascinating. Along the coast, you have the Mata Atlântica, or the Atlantic Forest, the Cerrado, or the tropical savannas in the center. This is also the area where most farms and ranches can be found. Also, keep in mind, Brazil is one of the top countries in meat production and exports.
I mean, I feel like I should comment on the Amazon. The thing is that, in truth, in reality, when you're living in Brazil, you're like, you don't listen or you don't hear a lot of things about the Amazon. So, I mean, we hear it because it's always in the international news, but within Brazil, nobody is bringing awareness to that as maybe they should. We're so caught up with our lives, and, you know, there aren't any news about, you know, what's happening with the Amazon. We kind of like learn about it from the international news. Well, I lived 8 years in Brazil, so I can't really say much about it. But when I was there 8 years, not once had I had a strong discussion about, you know, deforestation in the Amazon. We just don't know enough, and, you know, we got other things that we are worried about. And that's just the truth, you know, that's just reality.
In the south, you have the Araucaria, or the pine evergreen forests. In the north, you have the small mountains, especially close to the border of Venezuela, in which you can find one of the most notable natural landmarks being the tri-point border between Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil, Mount Roraima, even though Brazil only owns about 5% of the mountain. But still, it counts! Roraima is one of the strangest looking flat-top plateau mountains with vertical cliffs almost perpendicular to the ground, earning it the label as one of the hardest mountains to climb. Fun side note, Mount Roraima was one of the areas that inspired the scenery for the Pixar movie Up, which is a great movie. By the way, go ahead, watch it. And with that said, Pixar and Disney, you can't sue me for copyright infringement rights for using a clip of your movie in my corner box here, because in accordance with fair use limitation rights, I commented and gave a critique on your material. Just letting you know, you can't sue me. One of the most
Okay. That was cool. What was I gonna say? I don't remember. But that was so cool that they used Brazil or Brazilian landscape as a reference.
remarkably bizarre and unusual spots of the country, though, would have to be the famous flooded deserts of Lençóis Maranhenses. This place, located on the north coast of the Maranhão state, is almost alien-like, as there are virtually no places like it on Earth. Essentially, it's a sand dune desert with abundant lagoons speckled throughout the entire region. Although it gets a lot of rainfall yearly, the area supports little vegetation and wildlife. Nonetheless, the area draws in thousands of tourists yearly, as it contains the almost paradoxical juxtaposition of elements in its scenery. It's not every day that you see a flooded desert. All right.
Okay, so here's the thing. If you watch Whindersson Nunes, he has a song called Paraíso, and I'm pretty sure it was filmed there. It's amazing. It's beautiful. You gotta watch that. Actually, maybe if I react to it, maybe you'll appreciate it. I don't know. Do you want me to react to it? Let me know in the comments.
All right, let's talk about the Brazilian people.
Oh, careful now.
Biscoito, bolacha, biscoito, bolacha. Yeah.
Bolacha.
We'll explain what that means in a little bit. But first, now of course Brazil is incredibly diverse, but before we get into that little pie graph thingamajiglet that we always do here in the demographics section, I feel like it's very crucial to mention one important thing about Brazil's people. Now, everybody knows that one of the most dramatically unique traits of Brazil would have to be its people. When asked, what do you think a Brazilian looks like? The stereotype is somebody with a perfectly bronzed, toned body and with slight Germanic features. One reason why this stereotype has been perpetuated so extensively is because in a strange way, it's kind of true. Over the course of a few hundred years since colonization, Brazil's population has actually virtually invented an entirely new race that never exactly existed before, and it makes up nearly half of the entire population. I'm talking about the Pardo people. Now, although the definition is vague and up for relative dispute, essentially this is the easiest way I can describe it. Pardo people are kind of like people that are either too white to be black or too black to be white, and there's probably a little bit of Amerindian in there. That being said, now let's jump into the pie graph. Brazil has about 202 million people, making it the fifth most populous country in the world, right behind Indonesia. About 47% of the people identify as white. About
Brazilians and Indonesians, we are connected in some way. Always when we talk about Indonesia, Brazil comes up. Always when we talk about Brazil, Indonesia comes up.
43% identify as Pardo, about 8% are black, 1.5 Asian, and a very small portion, about 0.5% of the population, are Amerindian. Speaking of Asians, at about 1.5 million strong, Brazil is actually the country with the largest Japanese population outside of Japan. About 70% of whom live in the city of Sao Paulo. Asians have actually historically been migrating to Brazil for centuries. In terms of socio-regional distinctions, Brazil has quite the buffet of ethnic enclaves. For one, you can typically find more black people in the north, and especially in the Bahia state, where they make up over half of the entire population.
Bahia. Bahia. I love it how he's trying, but he's not getting any of the states right. It's Maranhão, Bahia, you know, because of the H. The H has a ñ sound in Portuguese.
This is also the area where you can disputably find some of the best capoeira masters in the world, as it is believed to have originated in this area. In the south, and more specifically in the Rio.
What do you mean believed? Well, what we understand is that the history of capoeira is that they used to practice dancing, but in reality it was a means of training so that they could escape slavery. So in the Quilombo, where they used to live, they used to practice dancing, which was capoeira, which is a style of fighting. That's what we learned, though. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not a geography teacher or anything like that. But I'm just saying that that's what is widely known and accepted. That's the story that we have learned in Brazilian history. That they wanted to train themselves, so they developed a type of fight disguised as a dance. Some people say it's a dance disguised as a fight, but it's actually a fight disguised as a dance because, you know, when they were confronted, they're like, we're just dancing, you know. Basically, that's it. And it makes much more sense.
Rio Grande do Sul state, you have one of the largest white populations in the entire country, with immigrants coming from places.
I've been to Rio Grande do Sul, which means a big river of the south.
In the Rio Grande do Sul state, you have one of the largest white populations in the entire country, with immigrants coming from places like Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. In fact, many of these places have remained relatively untouched by the rest of Brazil, and many of the communities still retain the mother language of the country the members of the community came from. Oh, and there's a joke in Brazil that nobody has met anybody from the state of Acre. It's so far and secluded that you may as well just call it North Bolivia. It's mine, Brazil!
Yeah, the story about Acre is it doesn't exist. It's where the dinosaurs are or died, or it doesn't exist. It's off the grid. That's the whole thing. If that's the whole joke about Brazil. Nobody knows where Acre is. You know, it's so far and secluded that we say it doesn't exist.
Oh, and there's a joke in Brazil that nobody has met anybody from the state of Acre. It's so far and secluded that you may as well just call it North Bolivia. It's mine, Brazil! Nope, too bad. We won it in the war. It's still ours. Deal with it. Then, of course, you have the various native tribal groups. There are about 240 tribes that a little over 900,000 people claim to be a part of ethnically. The government has recognized 690 territories and reservations for these various people groups that make up about 13% of the entire country's landmass, nearly all of it localized in the Amazon rainforest. Brazil's governmental agency for tribal peoples has a list of about 80 uncontacted tribal groups that deliberately choose to remain disconnected from the rest of the world, the governmental agency speculates that there are still many unnamed, undiscovered tribes currently living in the vast, uncharted forests of the Amazon. Culture-wise, it really depends on where you are in Brazil, but everybody knows that Brazil kind of has a very vibrant way that they carry themselves out to the rest of the world. The center of culture, disputably, being Rio de Janeiro, and the economic capital being Sao Paulo. Most of the population lives within driving distance of the coasts, so there is, in a sense, a prevalent beach culture, especially for the people on the east side of the country. Not everybody in Brazil loves soccer. In fact, many places prefer basketball, and skateboarding has actually been a huge thing that's been exploding over the past few years. And no, not everybody has been to a carnival. Oh, and another thing, there's currently a war.
It's interesting he mentions that. Yeah, many people, like, there are some states, especially in the south, that they actually canceled the carnival because of COVID. They deliberately just canceled. They're not going to have a carnival. My state, São Paulo, also canceled the carnival, but Rio, they're like, no, we don't even care about COVID. We're gonna have the carnival, you know. And there was this big dispute and this whole, you know, controversy that they were having the carnival with or without the government, you know. And I know it that's how powerful the carnival is. And in regards to sport, it's funny he didn't mention Brazil is like, I don't know how many times there were volleyball champions in the Olympics, and they're very good at volleyball, football, handball. Brazil has one of the best handball teams out there as well. So we are very, very into sports, not only football.
War going on in Brazil. It's been prefer basketball, and skateboarding has actually been a huge thing that's been exploding over the past few years. And no, not everybody has been to a carnival. Oh, and another thing, there's currently a war going on in Brazil. It's been very brutal. It's been going on for decades, and it's getting quite intense right now. I'm talking about the cookie war. In Brazil, people will ridicule you if you pronounce the word for cookie differently from them, and especially it's a whole Rio versus Sao Paulo thing. People in Sao Paulo will call it bolacha, and the people in Rio will call it biscoito. This conflict has led to the violence and deaths, leading in the victimization of people caught in the crossfire. And you almost fell for it, didn't you? Now,
okay, so that's how Brazilians laugh on WhatsApp, kind of like HUE, or a lot of K's, KKKKKKK, or hua hua hua, or hue hue hue. That's how Brazilians laugh when they're sending a WhatsApp message. Another thing, he's talking about biscoito and bolacha. The thing is, yeah, São Paulo and Rio have this, you know, this conflict. And of course, I'm biased to say this, but when we say biscoito, it's more like of a biscuit, right? So biscoito, biscuit, you think it's sweet and sugary. So biscoito is round and it's for coffee. And bolacha is actually savory. It's salty. So you eat it with butter. That's how I see it. And when you think I'm gonna eat a biscuit, you're not thinking it's salty, right? Or savory. So I don't know why this war is still going on. But I'll let you guys decide.
now let's talk about their relationships. Now, Brazil kind of gets along with everyone, but he's kind of like that friend that ventures off and does whatever he wants while you wait in the hallway until he comes back from doing whatever he's doing. First off, pretty much all of their neighbor nations get along with them, although Argentina has a huge competitive hatred for Brazil when it comes to soccer. But all of that aside, they have good relations and trade policies. Then, just like mentioned before in the Angola video, they get along with other nations of the former Portuguese Empire like Angola, Mozambique, Sao Tome and Principe, Cabo Verde, and so on. They even get along with Portugal and have no bitterness towards the former colonization. Now, when it comes to the US, for centuries...
What? Wait a second. We are more... Well, we have more sparks with Portugal than Argentina, I think. I would say so. We don't hate Portugal, but there are so many jokes and so many things that distances Brazil from Portugal. Of course, we have close relations. We love Portugal. We love everything that comes from Portugal. But I think the whole community still has a prejudice towards Portugal, and the whole Portuguese community still has a prejudice towards Brazilians. There are so many Brazilian jokes in Portugal, and they call us brazuca, and there are so many Portuguese jokes in Brazil, and we call them portugas. So there are still things. I mean, not at a personal level, but in general, if you're in a group of people, like you have a group of people, and then someone says, "Oh, I'm from Portugal," he's gonna be socially bullied in Brazil because, but not in a bad way. Brazilians love Portuguese, and but it's a thing, It's like in the USA. If you say you're from a third world country, if you say you're a foreigner, they're gonna play around with you a little bit, They're gonna make fun of your accent. They're gonna play around with you. It's not that they hate you. It's just that, you know, you're gonna be the foreigner in the group, you know and you see that it's a stereotypical thing, and that still happens in Brazil. um Argentina also has that, bickery thing with Brazil, but in all at the end of the day, we are very welcoming, we are very kind, we appreciate everyone, but there is a cultural um rivalry there. It's not all good and dandy.
and so on. They even get along with Portugal and have no bitterness towards the former colonization. Now, when it comes to the US, for centuries they've been good friends and have a deep history of trade and alliances. However, recently Brazil has been kind of diddle-doddling off, making friends with other people that kind of give the US the old shifty eye. Then we have Venezuela and Cuba. Brazil has sided with the Venezuelan government more in the past few decades and has built a $1.5 billion port in Cuba. Then we have Iran. Recently, Brazil has been testing the waters on attempting to build ties with them, although they haven't really improved much recently.
I had no idea. I had no idea. I know Brazil is helping Cuba, and I think that's why the US is but this is 5 years ago. But Iran, I don't remember.
Nonetheless, Brazil is quite the popular guy. Not many people dislike Brazil, except for maybe the Brazilians in Brazil that may complain about their own country's administrative affairs, but that's a lesson you'll have to learn by talking to an actual Brazilian person, not me. Plus,
Here's the thing about Brazil. I can complain about it. I, as a Brazilian, can go ahead and say whatever I want about it because it's my country. But if anyone else talks ill of my country, I will defend it. I will protect it. I know it's something that Brazilians are kind of a hypocrite about, but I'm not calling all Brazilians hypocrites. I'm just saying that we're the ones who can speak about Brazil, but we don't let anyone else talk about it. So that's the thing in Brazil. So I can badmouth my country, you can't. If it's so funny because if you're in a group of Brazilians and they're bad mouthing Brazil, and then you want to get in on the action and you're like, yeah, you said, will turn the whole discussion into, what? No, Brazil isn't a bad country. We have our problems, but it's the best country in the world. The whole discourse is going to turn into something positive, and they're going to start arguing with you and telling you how Brazil is good, and it's so funny. I myself, I don't like bad mouthing Brazil because I think as a foreigner, living in the UK, I should talk about the good things about Brazil, because many people they hear a lot of bad things about Brazil already as it is. So as a person living outside of Brazil in the UK, I should spread positivity. When I'm talking to my friends, I can talk about, how we can maybe help Brazil improve, and there are these discussions, but I don't really like talking bad about Brazil, at least not abroad, because I don't want other people thinking that my country is bad. In any case, I think it's a bit of it's patriotic, but also a little bit unfair, because you're the only ones who can talk about. I mean, we are the only ones who can talk about Brazil. You can't. So you keep your opinions to yourself. kind of thing. I don't like that. That kind of thing I don't like. I mean, I actually love knowing what people think about Brazil, and Brazilians do too. But um, you might see, like, even in his video, maybe you're gonna see a few things that people are complaining about what he said, and there are some people who defend Brazil with all they have, with all their pride, and they get a bit aggressive, but they mean well. So, but I don't agree with that. I mean, there are things that Brazil needs to be, um, they need to learn how to adapt. So I think that those things should be addressed. But then again, if you've never been to Brazil, if you haven't lived in Brazil, if you haven't had any experience with Brazil, then I don't think you should be talking about problems in Brazil, because I think only those who are from Brazil, live in Brazil, have experience and have connections with Brazil can actually tell you if it's good or bad, you know. And um yeah, but I don't accept, not accept, but I don't condone, I think that's the right word, this attitude. If you're in a group, you're like in a group of friends, talking about Brazil, and you're saying it's bad, and then somebody wants to put their 2 cents in that situation, I think you should accept it, right? As a Brazilian, I'm talking about Brazil. This person is living in Brazil. He's putting his 2 cents in. He's telling me what he thinks, his opinions. Okay, I'll accept that because I gave him room to speak, because he's in the group of friends. He's in my circle. So I'm giving him room to speak. That's my opinion. But that doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes people, even like their closest friends, if they say something you don't like, they're like, "Hey, you're not from Brazil. You don't know what you're talking about." Despite the person been living there like for 5 years or more. I don't know. So it's a culture that I don't like. But I do agree that if you've never been to Brazil, if you've never lived there, then you shouldn't be talking about it based on what you heard or what you saw, or the stereotypical ideas that you've seen in the news or in the movies, So those things are quite sensitive to a Brazilian. But I do agree that if you're with your friends, people you trust, people who have been to Brazil, people who have had an experience with Brazil, then okay, listen to them. And then if you feel offended, but if it's true, you shouldn't be feeling offended. You should, but still, if you still feel offended, and then you can just keep it calm and say, okay, let's change subjects and let's talk about something else. I think that's the right way to do it, rather than just lashing out and changing your whole discourse just because you were offended. I don't know. This might stir up some discussion in the comments, but hey, I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. I mean, you can't change your whole opinion about your country just because somebody else said you're correct. Somebody said, I agree with you, and then you're like, you know what, that's just wrong. And I don't know if that's exclusive to Brazil. Maybe other countries do the same, but yeah. I mean, I never talk about other countries that I haven't had an experience with. I mean, I've been to the US for a week, and I can talk about my experience of that week, but I can't talk about, you know, places that I've never been to. And I can only talk about that week that I spent in the US. That's it. Like, I've been there. This was what I did. This was what I felt, and I can talk about my experience. And I should accept the fact that maybe I didn't have a great experience. Maybe I did. And I can't base my arguments on that one experience of 7 days. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, I guess that's it. But I have lived in the UK for it's been almost 6 years now. And I had lived here before for like a year and a half. So in total, I'm gonna say almost 7 years living in the UK. I can talk about the country, um, and tell you about my experience. Okay, but even so, what I have to say, if it's good, it might please the British. If it's bad, it might not please them. Although I have had some discussions with some, some locals, and they agree because they're like, hey, it's true. It's true. What you're saying is true. I've been through the same. The thing is, if you have facts, then you can't argue against facts. Let's keep going. We're almost finished.
The Brazilians in Brazil that may complain about their own country's administrative affairs, but that's a lesson you'll have to learn by talking to an actual Brazilian person, not me. Plus, we're almost out of time. In conclusion, Brazil is so much more than just the Amazon and soccer, and we didn't even scratch the surface of Brazil in this video. And to find out more, I recommend just talk to a Brazilian. Just remember which side of the cookie you're on. Stay tuned. Brunei is coming up next.
Okay. As you can see, when you talk about Brazil with a Brazilian, he talks a lot. They talk a lot. Okay, so if you're talking about my country, I have a lot to say about it. So I'm sorry if I got a little bit chatty, but hey, here you go, listening about Brazil from a Brazilian. Although I'm not the expert in Brazil. Okay, I've lived there for I lived there for 8 years, and if you count the 3 years that I stayed there before leaving the country, that's 11 years in total. Let's say 12 years, to be fair. That's the whole experience I have with Brazil, 12 years. But still, it's my country. I lived most of my adult life there. Was it most of it? Yeah, I think most of it. Most of my adult life, I lived in Brazil. So I feel comfortable to say that I know a lot about Brazil. And I've not only lived in São Paulo, which is my hometown, I have lived all over, at least 6 other states. So yeah, I've been around and I've had friends from all over. And yeah, I know a little bit about my country. And I studied, of course, because when I went back to Brazil, I had to kind of like go into a sixth form college just to get my my scores. It's like a SAT kind of thing. So I needed to study about Brazilian history, Brazilian geography. I needed to do like my whole, because I never studied in Brazil. I never studied in a high school or not even kindergarten. I left Brazil when I was 3 years old. So I never studied in Brazil. So when I went back after I was an adult, I think I was 19 years old. I had to learn kindergarten, middle school, high school, everything in 6 months for my SATs. It was kind of like a Brazilian thing. And I know that I failed the first time, but I had to study again. And then I failed in Portuguese because at the time I didn't speak Portuguese. Not that well, though, not as well as I needed to. I think I took the Portuguese test 4 times before I passed it. But I passed in everything else, history, geography, everything, except for Portuguese. And I had to do it until I passed. And it's an interesting story because I passed Portuguese, and with my score, I actually got a scholarship to study in the Federal Institute, well, the Federal University of São Paulo for free because of my score in Portuguese. So there you go. I failed 4 times, and on my 5th try, I nailed it. I was top 4% of Brazil's scores. And yeah, I got a scholarship to study literature. And it was basically how I got into being a teacher. But that's not the whole story. We don't have time for my whole story. But you see, you fail and then you pass with honors. It's life. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Take care now. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of on Brazil. And if ever you want to visit Brazil, hey, I say go for it. Visit Brazil. It's a great place. It's a great country. I'm probably going to go to Brazil this year or next year, depending on COVID restrictions. If they lift the travel ban, then I'm going to plan my trip to Brazil, and I might vlog it. Maybe if you guys want to see that vlog, let me know in the comments. But it's going to be fun. I'll see you. Take care now. Bye bye.